Tonight we're going to spend time on recommendations that have come to us from the Use of Force Subcommittee. Meanwhile, I've gotten totally confused with all my papers. To let you know that we'll take testimony on each recommendation before the vote is taken by the COAB. Or comments, however you want to phrase that.
Kathleen?
Yes. The date didn't
Kathleen?
get changed. Yes.
Just a friendly reminder, when we make a recommendation, please follow or make a comment, follow the common ground rules out of respect for the running of this process, and just putting out that friendly reminder.
And by that you mean, Philip?
Well, like when somebody makes a comment, I'm just trying to add a friendly reminder that if there's a recommendation or a public comment, to please follow the common ground rules that we have out of respect for this process so it can run smoothly.
Okay, thank you. So just to let you know, Bud Pulis, the chair for the executive committee, is participating via telephone or live stream. I'm saying that like I know the difference. Excused absences tonight are Dr. Sharon Myron, Dr. Alicia Moreland Capua, and Dr. Capua is being honored at OHSU tonight for faculty teaching excellence. Senator Abel Gordley, Rabbi Michael Kahana, V. Revere, Captain Vince Elmore, and Jakari Jackson. So they're all excused absences for tonight. And to let you know, for the COAB members, there is a part of the settlement agreement that says that the Police Bureau is tasked with issuing an annual report, and you have a role in reviewing that report before it's finalized, before it's released to the public. And you should get a copy of this report tomorrow by email. On the March 24th agenda, you'll be able to ask the Portland Police Bureau questions and have discussions around that report. We will need to have feedback from you by April 1st.
Just on that, if I can make a quick note, that you will be getting the narrative of that report. It won't be the final version of how it's looked, because it's at the graphic, art. The layout is being done right now, but you will have at least the wording that's going to be put into the booklet. So when you get it, that is the final version of what the public will get. Thank you.
So will the charts be available at some point in time? Photos? It's just photographs?
It's the photos.
Okay,
and
okay.
make it look
Okay.
nice.
Make it look nice, okay. So, Mandy?
Yes. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Just a few notes. We are in a different room. So the bathrooms that we had previously are still the bathrooms to use. And so we are on the west side of the building right now. There are restrooms on the east side of the building. There is an emergency exit just down this hallway to the right, should we need to use it for any reason. And I also wanted to make sure everyone knew that this evening our food is right next door. So if you go out this door, it's just the room to the right, and you can bring food in here. So please make sure you get some food. And finally, just wanted to make sure that everyone at home knew, and that you all know, if you would like to attend this meeting and would like some childcare, please give me a call. I do need some advance notice, preferably 10 days before the meeting so I can arrange for it. But give me a ring at 503-823-5149, and I'm happy to do that for you. And I think that's it.
Okay. So, I'm not sure what's going on here. Are we ready? Where's Amy?
You can start talking.
Oh,
Not voting
okay.
yet. Go ahead.
Well, okay. Are we going to be ready? Is the question. Yes, all right. So we've been looking at the recommendations and considering those related to the use of force and weapons. So we're going to continue on with that tonight. After each item is introduced. We'll hear public testimony for anyone who wishes to speak. Then the COAB will discuss and make any motions and then take votes. There's a tracker form that'll show up on the screen here. And of course, we'll continue with the ayes and nays, or yes and no. Okay. And the remote participant will share the voting with Amy. Amy's going to let you know what that vote was. Any questions? Okay, we're going to start with 111215-6. That is, the recommendation is, okay, what is that? Okay, sign-up sheet. Okay. Recommendation is revise Directive 1090, special weapon use, to clarify what special weapons the PPB has approved or is only testing, when their use is authorized, and who can use them. Directive 1090 should be revised to clarify what special weapons the Portland Police Bureau has approved, when their use is authorized, and who can use them, and include at least the following: a comprehensive list of all the PPB's approved special weapons should be provided in the directive. A comprehensive list of all the PPB's special weapons, whether approved or only being tested, should be published on its website. Before resorting to the use of a special weapon, officers shall use all reasonable de-escalation techniques and tools which are available to them to avoid the use of such force. All uses of special weapons must comply with Directive 1010, use of force. Consistent with Directive 1010, use of force, an explanation of the facts and circumstances which must exist before the use of each special weapon is authorized should be clarified and spelled out. Who can use special weapons should be clarified and spelled out. Tom, did you want to say anything?
Sure. As I understand it, special weapons, according to the Police Bureau, do not include tasers and less lethal beanbag shotguns and regular duty firearms. It does include weapons such as AR-15s. I haven't really seen a list of other special weapons, but according to the police advisors, there are other special weapons, and they occasionally are tested or are used in testing. It's not clear. And the subcommittee felt that there should be disclosure for the public at every stage of either approved and or special weapons that are being tested. And that's primarily the focus of what the recommendation seeks to incorporate.
Tom, could I ask, what exactly does special weapons mean? Any kind of?
It's just the nomenclature that the Bureau has chosen to adopt for weapons that are not routinely, if I understand correctly, given to or used by officers, and sometimes they have to have certification. But AR-15s, for example, semi-automatic weapons that are used by a special emergency response team and perhaps others are not routinely used by officers. So that's an example. I do not know what other special weapons exist.
Can any one of the advisors help me with that question? I mean, what does special weapons means? What category does that fit into?
I'll read the definition in the directive. Any weapon provided or approved by the Bureau and authorized to be used only by trained CERT and RRT, Special Emergency Reaction Team, and Rapid Response Team members in a police action. Examples of such weapons include non-aerosol contained chemical agents, including CS gas, automatic weapons, rifles, and other special tactical weapons and ammunition.
What is CS gas, please?
Commonly referred to as tear gas.
Okay. Maria?
I was just gonna ask, what was the AR-15?
The AR-15 is the version, so it's a semi-automatic rifle, meaning that one pull the trigger means one round goes downrange. It is a rifle that's carried by certified officers on the street. They go through currently a 60-hour certification program to be certified to carry that.
Philip?
I've got a question for Paul. If you could please explain a bit more about what special weapons, what all is included in that category. I think that there's got to be more than what we know. And if you could include a list of those, that'd be great.
One would be a breaching shotgun. So what that is, it's a shotgun that is smaller and shorter that's carried by the Special Emergency Reaction Team to gain entry potentially into a secure door. And then the type of round that's carried, they vary, but one example would be a compressed copper, so it's almost like a fine dust when it comes out. Another would be a 40 millimeter less lethal munition launcher, both either for gas or for less lethal munitions. There could be a 12 gauge shotgun that is set up to launch chemical munitions. Those are just a few examples.
Thank you.
Okay. I think I have Dan signed up for public comment. You can only talk if you can find it.
Hi, I'm glad that there's attention being paid to this directive. I don't know that the Bureau posted this directive for review by the public yet. And in fact, there are no directives posted this month by the Bureau for review. I'm not quite sure why that is. But I'm glad Officer Meyer answered some of your questions. When they talk about 40 millimeter launchers and CS gas and all that, these are things that are used by the rapid response team against protesters generally. So it's good for us to know what our police bureau is planning to launch on its community members who are trying to express their First Amendment rights. An AR-15 is an assault rifle. That's the common term that you've probably heard for it. It's a civilian version of an M16 military rifle. So we're talking about weapons that are not just special, but very dangerous and deadly, and they should be greatly scrutinized, which is, I think, the purpose of this directive. So thank you for your work on it.
Okay, any discussion by the COAB?
Yeah. I had something. So thank you, Dan, for your comment. That got me thinking. I did want to ask something in relation to that. Are there any specific protocols or procedures that are in place as to how to get that approval to use those weapons if it's an emergency in a rapid response? How that approval process, what does that look like? Could you explain that? Is there a specific directive that does explain the process more, or is it required to have approval before you use that? Would you explain the process there?
There is a directive under crowd control and crowd management that talks about the process that is gone through before certain things happen. There are times when officers are or need to use action individually. However, CS gas, which I don't remember, I can't remember any time it's ever been used in the 20-some years I've been here against a crowd. But to use something like that, that is going to be a process that goes through the crowd critical incident commander. So there are directives that do address that for our rapid response team.
Any more discussion by the COAB? I call for a motion.
Yes, I move to go ahead and vote on this recommendation.
Okay. Is that a motion to, okay. Bill and Michelle, okay. So all in favor of passing this recommendation, vote, huh? Am I getting some feedback over here? Or?
Is there a need for a second?
Yes, she did. She did, yeah. So, yes, thanks. I'm going to call Ms. Edmo,
Yes.
Mr. Pulis,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Ms. Curley,
Yes.
Ms. Lanford,
Yes.
Ms. Medina,
Yes.
Ms. Silver, Mr. Steenson,
Yes.
Mr. Wolf.
Yes.
Pass. The motion is passed. That is to recommend the proposal that was read earlier. We'll move to the next one, which is 111-2157. Revised Directive 630.15, foot pursuits. Directive 630 should be revised to further clarify when foot pursuits should be initiated or terminated and include at least the following. Foot pursuits may precipitate the use of unnecessary force as defined by Directive 1010. For example, takedowns, pushes, and tackles used to terminate a foot pursuit can pose a risk of serious physical injury and death to the person being pursued. Takedowns, pushes, and tackles used to terminate a foot pursuit also pose a risk of injury to the officer employing the technique. These risks are a primary reason why foot pursuits are not required of officers and are a consideration as to whether a foot pursuit should be initiated or terminated. Solo foot pursuits are prohibited. Foot pursuits should be terminated when partners split and lose sight of each other. If the identity of the suspect is known and the suspect is not posing an immediate threat to others, officers should consider terminating the foot pursuit in favor of later apprehension. Primary consideration in determining whether to initiate or terminate a foot pursuit is the severity of the crime for which the suspect is being pursued, applicable statutes and PPP use of force policies, and the benefit of the suspect's capture. Radio communication at the initiation of a foot pursuit is mandatory. In addition, the directive should be revised to eliminate any potential ambiguity on when armed suspects are to be pursued. Okay. Questions? I think we have Dan up for public comment.
Can I
Yes.
talk about
Sorry, Tom, sure.
the two primary things the recommendation seeks to accomplish is to follow the recommendations of the park people and the OIR group people who have provided expert consultation to the Police Bureau since 2005. And in that regard, they have, because of the dangers associated both for the person being pursued and for the officer, they've recommended that solo foot pursuits not be allowed. The other primary objective of the recommendation is to broaden the considerations that officers need to take into account before they initiate a foot pursuit. And currently, the directive does not include the severity of the crime for which the suspect is being pursued as a factor. And tragically, the death of James Chassie involved at worst an allegation that he was urinating in public, and yet a foot pursuit was utilized, and he was tackled and subsequently died from blunt force trauma. So, and another example is there's a case that Paul may be able to talk about where in a solo foot pursuit, an officer died in an alley or something like that. So it's just a dangerous situation to run after people and to tackle them or push them down onto hard concrete surfaces or to get trapped into areas where you're alone. And so the recommendation seeks to follow previous experts that the city has had consult with them, and to, in particular, follow the OIR group recommendation about including the severity of the crime as something important to consider before you start chasing after somebody.
Okay. Dan, I have you signed up.
Dan Handelman with Portland Cop Watch. And, well, point of clarification, is the TASER directive the one that's on hold while more work is being done on it?
No, pepper spray.
Which one is?
Pepper spray.
Pepper spray. Okay, because I think I forgot to put in some comments about the TASER one. So I'm glad that Mr. Steenson brought up the James Chassie case. I was going to bring that up if you hadn't. There was another case, and it's very hard to know what is defined as a foot pursuit, like how far the person has to have gone away. A case just came before the Citizen Review Committee last week where a woman who has health issues and had previously been harmed by the police had flashed her honored citizen's pass at the police officer, the transit police officer, showed him her ID, but he didn't see it long enough, so he started yelling after her, and she was trying to go look at the reader board to see when the next train was coming. And he ran up behind her and grabbed her purse and yanked her around and re-traumatized her. She was actually asking CRC how she could get therapy to help deal with what happened. And the commander noted that the governmental interest was a $2.50 bus ticket, which actually, when it's an honored citizen's pass, is less than that. And I'm just hoping that this policy would include considering even that short of a foot chase. I don't know how far it was on the platform and those kinds of things. I'm not asking you to change it. I'm just saying I want to go on record so the Bureau understands that that would be, in my opinion, a very short but still a pursuit that wasn't justified by the crime that was alleged. So thank you again.
Thanks, Dan. Comments from the COAB? Questions? Paul?
As I was looking through some of the recommendations, as I got down to one, it said the current policy is not comprehensive, does not comport with the best practices, and does not sufficiently. Best practices, I'm trying to figure out what those exactly are.
What are you referring to, the 11215-7?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
And it talks about best practices, and I'm trying to figure out what those exactly were and how that was determined, and then what part of the policy isn't comprehensive. It talks in great detail. I've tried to find Seattle's, looked at other places, and the policy is very clear and very comprehensive. Regarding solo foot pursuits, in the con statement, you notice that one of my concerns is that if an officer stops somebody for a warrant and they flee and the warrant is for homicide and they just don't chase after the person, I would think that it would be an expectation of the community that we use some tactics that are spelled out in this policy to try to apprehend this person. And again, it's following at distance, it's splitting off and maybe not following the same route, it's using maybe cars in between you as they're running down the street. There's a lot of different things. I don't know how many people have read this directive, but I think some of these things in here are going to be dangerous and I think don't follow what the community expects.
Can you be specific about what you believe will be dangerous? I mean, I think that's the best. I'm looking at the policy now, and you're saying that there are things in here that are dangerous?
Yeah, well, I think the part in some of the recommendations are, like I say, I stopped somebody just who jaywalked or whatever it is, it's a lawful stop, and I find out they have a warrant for murder, and they take off running. And if it's solo foot pursuits are prohibited, I can't chase that person.
Okay, you want to respond to that, Tom?
We're simply relying upon the experts that have
I
already.
guess I don't know how that's dangerous.
Wait just a minute.
Go ahead.
Tom?
Go ahead, Phil.
I'm just wanting to know how that's dangerous. I'm sorry, but if there's a chase involved and someone has a weapon, I'm trying to understand that perspective, where the danger is in that pursuit.
The dangers for every single person, potentially, as that person gets away.
Yeah.
It's a danger to the community, a danger to the people that we're sworn to protect. And again, another question
Okay.
I have is, what are
Okay.
best practices
Go
and
ahead,
how is
Tom.
that determined?
Can you address the best practices issue, Tom?
The Police Accountability Resource Center, I may have the name incorrect.
It's perf.
Yeah, it's park, no park.
Oh, okay.
They are
Assessment.
they are a nationally recognized nonprofit organization that advises law enforcement agencies throughout the country. They were hired and repeatedly provided reports to the city of Portland from about 2003 to 2009. They currently are the monitor in the settlement agreement in Seattle, where the DOJ sued the city of Seattle. So when they give the city a recommendation that says presumptively solo pursuit should be banned, and that hasn't happened,
Answer the question.
the subcommittee felt that that was something that was important. These are police experts that are telling the city that's a policy that should be in place. And I can't defend the policy other than to say that experts believe that that's an appropriate policy. If I hear you correctly, Paul, the examples you were describing are not solo foot pursuits. You've got other people involved. You've got cars that are monitoring it. The example you gave, there are other people involved. And we're not talking about that. We're talking about just a one-on-one, all-alone foot pursuit of someone who's not actively engaged in dangerous activity. There may be a warrant, that's true, but the person isn't threatening serious physical injury or something like that. And that's sort of the distinction I think that Park is drawing. If there are circumstances where the person is being a threat at the time they're fleeing, I think that changes the calculus.
Does that change the prohibition against solo foot pursuits?
I think a threat, an active threat, active aggression, aggravated aggression, would change the calculus. But if someone's just fleeing who has a warrant, that person is not presenting a current threat.
So I guess the example that I wrote here is it's just a one-on-one contact.
Yep.
I find out the person has a warrant for homicide. I don't see any weapons on him. I don't see anything that would lead me to believe that, but now they take off running. So is that somebody I don't chase?
The police experts who advised the city of Portland said no. Presumptively, you should not engage in that solo foot pursuit. That's what the subcommittee relied upon.
Okay. I have a question here from Bud. Because I don't know we're going to resolve anything here, you've given your opinions. His question is, much of this recommendation seeks to avoid dangerous pursuits that put both police and residents at too much risk. So this should make police themselves safer. Do advisors feel these changes, especially eliminating solo pursuits, would make them safer? It's directed at the advisor. Tasha?
So the simple answer to that is yes, but that's not why most of us put our hand up and swore an oath to protect the public. So the situation Paul's talking about isn't a hypothetical for me, it's a reality. I had a one-on-one contact with a gentleman who was wanted for a homicide and potentially was armed with a weapon, and he ran from me and I chased him. And I was on my own until the rest of the police officers showed up. But I think that I felt an obligation to protect the public and not let him get away. And so I think probably for me, whenever you put in a policy, always or never, you are really limiting the ability of people to make good decisions. So the prohibition piece, I just think there needs to be a lot of caution when you use those two words, always and never, are fairly strong statements.
Rochelle, then Michelle.
Well, I think in regard to the police experts, both Park in several reports and OIR in several reports, including their very last report, which is a couple of months ago, recommended against solo foot pursuits for the very reason I think that Bud was asking the question, that both police people and citizens can get hurt in the process. So the suggestion would be, and I'm not a police person, of course, is to use some other tactic or method. So I think that when you're in uniform, you have a little talky thing there. And so you can call and you can describe the person and you can say where he is, he or she, or they, or, and there are other ways in which you can capture that person. You don't have to only run after him to make everybody safe.
Michelle.
Sorry, I'm catching that light a little bit. So I've had a similar situation to what Tasha had, and I agree with what she was saying. First of all, in mine, it started out as actually my partner and I splitting, and I ended up solo for a while until we could get assets there to help capture this person because he had committed a violent sexual assault on a female. It was a stranger-to-stranger deal. That, to me, is exactly kind of what we were talking about. That's a very much a dangerous person to the public. And, you know, maybe we need to define truly what solo is, because everything might, or something might start out as solo, but we're not trained to just pursue by ourselves. We're trained to get help there, whether it be a canine, whether it be seeing if the airplane's up, whether it be, you know, getting a perimeter set up, depending upon what it is. I'm not the fastest person, so I very rarely would catch people, but I could at least keep them in sight to be able to set the assets up in place to be able to capture that person. So no, yes, it may start out as a solo foot pursuit, but we're not trained to stay on a solo route. We're trained to get help there and actually use everything that we have capable to us to use to capture that person safely without us getting hurt or them getting hurt.
Philip. Oh, I'm sorry. Ime.
I guess I just want to make a distinction. Earlier, when we started discussing this, we were talking about use of force. We were talking about police who chase people on their own and then harm them, right? Who grab people's purses on the edge of a platform, or who knock people down so hard that they have blunt force trauma. To me, that is the issue, is what they are doing, right? Once they have that person. But chasing them is kind of expected. If, you know, I read the reports that come to us every day about, you know, the most recent things that the police are doing, and many of them include the police actually stopping somebody for one thing and then finding out that they've done a bunch of other things that are quite dangerous, or that they have a weapon hidden somewhere. And I think it's important that we allow them to do their jobs. If someone is running through my yard, which has happened, right, who's harmed someone, I'm gonna call a police officer and I'm gonna expect them to chase them, because I'm not gonna do it. So I just wanna make that distinction so we're clear, because I don't see that language here, that we started with, that language about use of force once a person has been caught, right? And I think we absolutely need to do something about that, but the actual running after them is a different thing. At least I think so, and Tom, if you feel differently, or anybody on your committee feels differently, I would like to hear that.
Philip, and then Rita.
Yeah, I just want to ask a question and clarify about pursuits. The recommendation here is to protect the suspect and the officer. And I remember there were other recommendations limiting use of force, and that was a concern because officers wanted to protect themselves from being hurt, and that seems in conflict with what we're talking about right now. You are saying that solo pursuits protect the officer and the individual. I guess it's just a conflict of what I've heard in the past, and I guess I'm just trying to understand that. It protects the officer and the suspect in the pursuit, and again, when that pursuit does take place, that's an act of escalation, and that really worsens the situation, and the situation can become more dangerous from there. So concerns about the suspect and the officer, and keeping both of those people alive. I understand that it's a sensitive subject and a little bit sticky here, but that act of pursuit is an escalation. If it was possible to communicate with other officers and get them involved and have other officers come down, if there's a warrant for sexual assault, I don't see that person running to rape another person right there in that immediate situation. I don't understand how that's a danger to the community. If if you don't, I could see you having time to communicate with other officers and apprehend that person. I have seen that happen without a solo pursuit and seen people get apprehended, and that's just some thoughts that I'm having on the topic.
Okay, hold on. Did you want to respond to that, Paul?
A little, yeah, I think I can briefly do that. So pursuits, being safe for the officer as well as for the community, and it feels like it's a conflict. As written in this directive, it talks about that generally you're not going to attempt to overtake the fleeing suspect until sufficient cover's been there, and then it talks about a number of different things that you can do to keep that person in sight, to keep them in sight so that the capture is there. What I can tell you is people don't just run in a straight line away from you. They run left and then right and then left and right. They're trying to get away. So running in a straight line is not going to be the best thing if I can just see them as I stand there. It is amazing how quickly somebody can get away. Regarding the sexual assault, yes, they probably aren't going to do a rape right there, but if I don't catch them that night because all of a sudden I can't find them and they're gone, could they do one tomorrow? Could they do one the next day? Could they do, and the assumption being what has previous behavior shown? Do I have a commitment, an oath, a duty to try to apprehend those people? And again, I think this directive talks about a lot of different things that can be done to safely capture that person, both for the community.
I want to play
and
devil's
for the officer.
advocate for a moment.
Okay.
Which is more
Wait, hold on, just a
danger-
minute now. Just a minute. There are other people who are waiting to speak, Philip. Hold on. So, Laquita, and then Siadam,
Yes,
and then Jimmy.
I agree with Ime and what it is that she's saying, and from my own experience as well, as far as where we started off having this conversation of, if an officer were to be, engaging with the suspect, and like for my situation was I was just riding my bike down the sidewalk downtown. There was no sign that stated that I could not ride my bike on the sidewalk, and I didn't know that, and I was pulled off of my bike by an officer that was in pursuit to another person. So that I see, but I believe that there are situations that happen that you just don't know. And so if an officer, for the safety of the community, need to do what the officer needs to do, as they were highly trained to do that, then I would say that that's something that they should be allowed to do. And that's just because I know where I live at, I know how often I'm in the community, and I know what it is that I'm seeing. But just a random situation where an officer feels the need to just, put their hands on someone, that's unacceptable. But the fact that they're working on keeping the community safe in the situation, because it's happening, it's, so I agree with what it is that you're saying, if that made any sense to the folks.
Siadam.
I guess I'm, again, trying to reconcile the two different messages that I'm hearing regarding this recommendation, and I have some sample, I don't know if it would be considered a friendly amendment, but I would love to hear about the best practices. I mean, that Tom referred to earlier about no solo foot pursuits, but in absence of that, the language that I would want us to consider is solo foot pursuits are prohibited unless the suspect is considered to be an immediate danger to the community, or if there's some sort of evidence that they're an immediate danger to the community. So I'd like to just offer that up. And then secondly, something that I heard when Dan was talking and a couple of COAB members is that there may be some sort of implicit bias related to who gets pursued by foot and what are the reasons that we're pursuing particular folks by foot. I mean, are we chasing folks disparately? Are we chasing folks who are part of particular communities more than other folks? And is it over something as small as $2.50? I think that is I don't think that's good. And so I think we also need to consider why are we choosing to pursue folks by foot, which I don't know that I'm seeing that reflected in this recommendation either.
Okay, Jimmy.
Yeah, I have kind of torn on this issue, solo foot pursuits. When we talk about solo foot pursuits, one thing comes to mind. I know we're trying to help both people engaged, the officers engaged as well as the public that's engaged as far as the foot pursuit goes. But when we talk about solo foot pursuit, I think about trust, and we need to somehow get that level of trust raised, the public trust of the police officers. There's a one-on-one foot pursuit, and it goes off the radar, and nobody's there but the police officer and the suspect. Whatever happens after that, whether the suspect is apprehended or not, or if he or she is, or God forbid, they're shot and killed by an officer. And then it could go the other way. It could be vice versa. But the person who's alive is going to have the last story. It's going to have the last tale. They're going to be able to frame the story the way they want. So that's why I'm torn. I'm torn like, okay, well, if officers pursuing it and something happens gravely, the officer's going to have the story to tell, or vice versa if something happened gravely the other way around. So that's why I say, well, solo foot pursuit should be looked at very carefully, and there should be kind of some perimeters set around them. And some of the perimeters will be some of the things you, see, Adam talked about just now. You know, but there's, again, I'm torn. I don't know if they should be solo, and we have to maybe define solo in a bigger way. Solo might be from here to that wall. If I'm chasing someone, you know, okay, well, there's maybe people around, but that's solo. To me, that would be fine with me. I don't have no problem with that. But solo, if they chase somebody for 5 blocks solo, out of everybody's sight, nobody don't tell her what happens. Now we're at a situation where whoever comes out is going to be able to tell the story. And, you know, I'm just be honest with you. Lately, that ain't been too good for non-suspects being pursued. It just hasn't been, and God, now it goes back to the trust issue, because we entrust the police officers with a great deal of power, just a great deal of power, and rightfully so. They should have the power to do a lot of things after they went through the trainings and this kind of thing, and we should be able to trust them. But there's been some incidences that are not only important, but here in America, where trust is being eroded real bad. So when somebody say, I don't want an officer chase me without another officer with them, you know, I rather have, you know, some more witnesses. So the solo thing is kind of hard for me. But at the same time, I would not want to stop officers from doing their jobs. I would not want to stop them. If they're going to chase somebody, I don't have a problem with them chasing somebody within reason. But then the whole thing goes back to, where do we stop? Where does it stop to say, okay, what's the parameters to say, okay, we need to let this go and make sure the other people, backup is coming in to make sure this is getting done in a good manner. So it's really Yeah, because I'm torn on this one big time, but
I want to hear from Rochelle and then Philip, and then I want to hear Seatum if you want to make that as a friendly amendment to the proposal. Rochelle?
Well, I think the issue about the foot pursuits, it does go back to where we started relative to force. Because if an officer is alone and is chasing a person just to make sure that he or she knows where he is and calling for help is one thing. But if they're chasing to apprehend, which is the word that Paul used, that apprehension in the chase, the person is not going to stop and say, oh, okay, is going to wind up in a force situation. You're going to have to tackle that individual or trip that individual or somehow take that individual down, apprehend he or she, take them into custody, and that's going to involve force. After you've been running, whether you're running from here to the end of the room or you're running 5 blocks, your heart is racing faster. You are not feeling kindly towards the person that you're running after. And the force may be more forceful than it should be. And for those reasons, I think, the experts are saying that solo pursuit is not a good idea because it leads to bad situations with force.
Philip, and then we'll come back to Seatum. Then we'll wrap this up.
Okay, I wanted to respond to Paul's comment about the rape situation. I'm wondering which is more dangerous. If you're pursuing somebody who has raped a person, if you're alone, that means you don't have time to inform other officers that I'm chasing this suspect, that there's no time in the area because no time to get that message out because you're involved in the chase. And no one's there to see it. If they disappear, they're still a danger to the community later on. Or if this situation is worse, if you go ahead and call in support from other officers and are able to catch that person later on. I mean, and if you do a solo pursuit, it's almost guaranteed to become an escalation in use of force. So for a solo pursuit, I remember for myself as a citizen with an officer here in Portland, I was tackled to the ground because they assumed that I was resisting arrest and I was ignoring the officers, that I was ignoring their commands. And it was really an issue of I wasn't able to hear them. And so I was tackled, everything was a bit derailed, and that's one of the reasons to avoid using a solo pursuit is it's not in line with best practices, and that's really my final decision personally.
Okay. Do you have a definition for solo pursuit?
Solo pursuit would be an individual officer who is chasing after somebody. When I said the word apprehension, it means catching them in the sense of at some point in time. It doesn't mean that it's that single officer catching them. It could be it could be a canine officer 10 blocks away from where I am now. But apprehension is just catching them. And again, that could be done in many different ways. So that's a misunderstanding or I didn't, I guess, describe, or define what that meant very clearly.
Okay. So, Seatum, you had some language that you expressed, and I wondered if you wanted to put that in as a friendly amendment.
I mean, I'm willing to put it in the as a friendly amendment, but it doesn't sound like the committee might consider that friendly. Does that? But it's up to
Talk to your chair here.
If it wasn't for recognized national police experts that have told the city repeatedly to stop solo pursuits, foot pursuits, I would consider a friendly amendment, but I don't think it is, given the expertise that is weighed in on the issue and the subcommittee is trying to put forward.
So do you want to withdraw the language? Do you want to make a motion as a separate?
I mean, I guess At this point, I'll go ahead and withdraw it and vote on the amendment, or vote on the recommendation as written.
Okay. All right, so we have before us a recommendation on revising Directive 630.15 on foot pursuits. We had a full discussion. Jimmy?
Question for Paul.
Okay.
Paul, speaking of solar pursuit and this directives, is there any way or just any kind of, what's your take on that? With these directives here, it can kind of prevent some stuff from happening, like a solo one-on-one pursuit, and the officer overtakes the person, and there is some tragic stuff happening, one way or the other. How does training or what is there? How can you explain how that can not happen? Maybe how an officer in a one-on-one solo pursuit cannot maybe apprehend the suspect or not apprehend them, but there's some way that because I don't know about this deal, but it's about trust, I guess. That's where I'm at.
So the directive speaks very specifically about the dangers of a foot pursuit, both for the officer as well as for the community, and that they're inherently dangerous. It talks into great detail about that a number of times. It then goes again and says generally the officer, sworn member, is not going to overtake the fleeing suspect, but to keep them in sight until sufficient other cover is there. And then it gives multiple things to do to try to make that safe. It also talks about that if you lose sight of somebody for more than a second or two, that now you start moving back out of and into tactical apprehension techniques, and it lists at least 6 or 7 of those different things. So the policy is very comprehensive in that. It talks about the dangers. It also says if you don't want to pursue, no sworn members shall be criticized and decided against initiating, discontinuing their involvement, or even terminating a pursuit. There's a line that specifically says that. So there's a lot of things built into this policy that talks about the inherent dangers of it. It talks about ways that we can do this safely. It talks about requirements, things that you need to do. I know Philip talked about, chasing after somebody. You're not going to be able to give all that information out. That's not how it actually works. You are able to give all those things out, and if you can't give those things out during a pursuit, then it's going to get terminated by a sergeant. If you're not given direction of travel and the description of the person and where you are in your location, a sergeant's going to terminate that pursuit immediately. So it talks about a lot of different things, and again, written into the policy, we talked about the one-on-one, that generally your job's not to overtake them by yourself, but to get sufficient officers there to help take this person into custody and apprehend them in a safe manner for everybody.
So Paul, if the pursuit starts just like that, you're gonna be on the radio. Boom, I'm on the radio. I'm chasing, or what? Or somebody's on the radio, or
you need to get on the radio immediately. Talk about one, that you're in pursuit, what direction, where you are, what direction you're traveling, and it's kind of like a vehicle pursuit too. It's the same kind of thing as looked at as if you're not able to give all of these bits of information out, they terminate it. You're not in a position where it's safe for anybody. So the sergeant's going to terminate that pursuit immediately. So yes, when you're pursuing, you need to be able to get those things out while you're running, and you can. I've did it numerous times.
Okay. So now, we're back to the recommendation, the controversial part having been discussed about the prohibition of solo foot pursuits. Do I get a motion for the recommendation?
I make a motion that we accept the recommendation.
May I have a second?
1112157.
Second.
Second is Philip, okay? I will now call the roll. Ms. Edmo?
Abstain.
Mr. Pulis?
I think it should be yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Nay.
Ms. Curley?
Nay.
Ms. Lanford?
Abstain.
Ms. Medina? Ms. Silver?
Yes.
Mr. Steenson?
Yes.
Mr. Wolf?
Yes.
Bud is a nay.
The motion fails. All right, Tom?
What I would propose
She
is
had a-
that we withdraw that one sentence about the solo foot pursuits being prohibited and vote on the recommendation without that, and return the issue of solo foot pursuits to the subcommittee for further study and a possible recommendation that will address some of the concerns that I think got in the way of the passage of the recommendation as is.
Maria?
And just to add to that, Tom, I think there are some things we need to look at. Otherwise, I don't think there would be professional policy people recommending that there not be solo pursuits. So there's obviously a problem around that. And I know we being community members, like, I would be scared if one police officer was chasing me by myself down an alley. I would be freaked the heck out. So I get why people are afraid of that, but I also think that sometimes it's necessary. And so if we can look at maybe when you go back to the subcommittee to look at maybe bringing some of those alternatives to the group so that we can see what people could do instead of doing solo foot pursuits. But I just wanted to encourage everyone and let you know I didn't like oppose it because I think there's something wrong with suggesting it. I just feel like we need more information, and also to let you all know that it would just be good to have more information from you all too about why you think maybe the community and why people who work in policy are saying that it might be a bad idea, because you all probably know just as well as us, like,
Okay.
where the problems may lie.
Let me make one comment, though. None of the police advisors are policy people, and I'm not
Right, but
disrespecting them for that, but it's.
Right, but they do the job.
I understand, but they're not policy
Okay.
people, so this is not the
Let's-
Bureau
Let's
commenting
move
on
on to
policy.
No.
the recommendation itself. The amended proposal. Hold on, Laquita.
Yeah, I also respect what Maria has just said about, taking a step back for me to just gain a little bit more information for myself. It's not that I didn't see that it was necessary, Tom, and I thank you guys for your efforts, Tom, Bud, and Philip, and also Paul, Michelle, and Tasha, but just kind of like for myself in the space that I feel that I need a little bit more information and look further into that, and possibly next time. I did read what we will be getting into tonight, but doing a little bit more of my own homework and research on, like you said, statistics from, what was that, 2003 to 2009? So yeah, thank you. I just wanted to put that out there.
So okay. What I would like, Tom has proposed amending this proposal. Okay? So can I get a motion?
Second.
Where's the first? Okay. Siadam and Philip, okay? So now we're going to call for the vote on the amended proposal. Or the. No, I thought we were, okay.
It needs to be amended first.
Okay, to amend the proposal by removing the line solo foot pursuits are prohibited. Okay? Call the roll again. Ms. Edmo?
Yes.
Mr. Pulis? Hmm?
I'll get in a moment.
Okay. Jimmy? Mr. Johnson? Dr. Curley?
Yes.
Ms. Lanford?
Yes.
Ms. Medina? Dr. Silver?
Yes.
Mr. Steenson?
Yes.
Mr. Wolf?
Yes.
So this passes, and now we're voting on the amended proposal. All right? We're now voting on the proposal that does not have the line in it because we just took the line out. Start at the beginning. Ms. Edmo?
Yes.
Mr. Pulis? Do we have a vote for,
I'm getting clarification.
okay. Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Dr. Curley?
Yes.
Ms. Lanford?
Yes.
Ms. Medina? Ms. Silver?
Yes.
Dr. Silver? Mr. Steenson?
Yes.
Mr. Wolf?
Yes.
Motion passes. All right, we're moving on to the next one, which is, should be 112158. Revised Directive 315.30, satisfactory performance. Revised Directive 315.30, satisfactory performance, should be consistent with all of the COAB's recommendations for rewriting Directive 1010, use of force. The mission statement and some of the core principles from rewritten Directive 1010 should be restated in revised Directive 315.30. For example, before resorting to the use of force to manage confrontations, officers shall use all reasonable de-escalation techniques and tools which are available to them to avoid the use of force. A comprehensive, well-functioning system to monitor officers to ensure that they are performing satisfactorily should be implemented by the PPB. The system should include the use of the existing employee information system, as well as other management tools such as annual performance evaluations. The employee information system and any other management tool used to measure satisfactory performance should have the ability to include instances of positive officer behavior, including but not limited to consistent application of best practices and singling out of exemplary performance that goes beyond the enumerated policies and procedures in the service of maintaining positive community relations and engenders public trust in the objectivity and fairness of the Portland Police Bureau. Tom?
3 comments. There's not a lot to this recommendation, but I want to make it clear that the subcommittee did not evaluate the current employee information system. As both the DOJ and the COCO have commented, there are probably significant problems with that system. So by sort of incorporating the use of that system, it's not an endorsement by the subcommittee that it's a good system as it is, but it's what is in place. The other thing that some members of the subcommittee thought was important was to point out that the purpose of evaluating performance is twofold. It's to determine areas where there is need for improvement and to help officers improve performance. It's not necessarily punitive. It's a tool to help officers do their job better. And to go along with that, members of the subcommittee and then approved by the subcommittee thought it was important to recognize good performance by officers. That this satisfactory performance directive should not just be designed to look at bad aspects of performance. It also should look at good aspects.
I don't have anybody signed up for public comment on this one. Is there anybody from the public? Okay, we've got 2 people. Dan, go ahead.
I thought I put my name on all the sheets that were there. Dan Handelman again from Portland Cop Watch. Again, I know these discussions can run late into the night. I'm not necessarily expecting you to do an amendment if you don't have time to discuss it. But in the existing directive in section 2.1, it says that the Bureau requires that members are capable of and apply force when necessary. And I find that that's disturbing because it could mean that an officer could be disciplined for not using force. And I think that that shouldn't ever be the case. And it also has this directive The way you phrased it, I think, is good because you're asking that this be consistent with 1010. One of the things that happened with this directive was parts of 1010 about how to hold officers accountable were moved here, and it basically says that the members should be developing over the course of their practice of law enforcement skills and abilities to resolve confrontations without resorting to higher levels of force. But it could imply that a single incident early on in an officer's career of excessive force might not result in discipline because they haven't had a chance to display that over the course of their career. So those are just some of the concerns we've expressed about this in the past at Portland Cop Watch. Thanks.
This is Bob from the Police 911, and I'd like to bring up, I've been manhandled twice by the Portland Police for filming. And I didn't do anything wrong. About almost a month ago, I got grabbed by a Portland police officer and shoved back. Just a few days ago, I got grabbed. A Portland police officer slapped me in the back, grabbed me, and pushed me when I was crossing the street because I wasn't crossing fast enough. So when we look at these use of forces policies, we need to look at exactly what's going on and stuff. I had a traffic accident a few months back. I'm still going through physical therapy and stuff like that. There's no reason for them to use force to move me when I'm sitting there filming. When I'm walking and filming, the officer goes, "You can't stand in the middle of the street, can you cross?" Yeah, I'm crossing. You know, just because I don't move as fast as the officer would like and they're cowering behind a pillar, to me, you know, that's the wrong use of force. An officer shouldn't be allowed to use force like that.
Thank you.
I want to chime in here too, actually, because I've been attacked multiple times by the police for just filming, including twice recently by Sergeant Leo Besner, the cop who was the guy who took the sniper shot and killed a suicidal man when he was on the phone with the hostage negotiation team. But this is a big problem, actually, that the police just think they can put their hands on people and manhandle people when there's no reason to. They can simply instruct people with their voice instead of putting their grubby little paws on people, you know. And I've actually filed a complaint with the IPR about Leo Besner. On the last thing, they didn't find anything, and so basically the IPR doesn't seem to really do much when police manhandle cop watchers, and I'm actually facing 2 criminal trials, and I go to court tomorrow to schedule these to go to a full jury trial, and that's just simply for filming. I was manhandled by a G4S security guard, and he falsified charges against me, and that's Charlie Hales, the police commissioner's personal bodyguard, and G4S security are actually being used as a extra legal type of paramilitary force to bully people when the police aren't bullying them. So there's quite a lot of stuff going on, and there's a lot of war on journalists and whistleblowers and activists and other stuff. And I'd actually like to see if you guys could start looking more into like some of these secret police files that they have. I don't know, the police had red squad files on activists, and that's been going on for years. So I would assume that in this age of surveillance that we live in, with the Joint Terrorist Task Force joining at the hips with the Portland Police Bureau and other city agencies, that I would think that the monitoring is even bigger than ever, since we live under a national security state. Then, you know, national security overrides the Constitution at this point, and everything is done in the war on terrorism's name and this, that, and the other thing, including monitoring Black Lives Matter people
Keith, your time is
by
up.
Department of Justice. So maybe you guys should
Keith,
try
your
and
time
look
is
into
up.
the secret police files. I'd like that.
Thank you. The question, I have a question here about the employee information system. Can one of the advisors say what it does, how it works? The EIS?
I'll get it.
EIS.
I'll answer that for you. So EIS is a system where you can actually you just track, monitor performance, or track and monitor officers, or actually everybody's performance, because I think at this point any supervisor can make a note in the system on anybody that works for them, both places where people need to improve and where they've done well. Both. You can do both.
Okay, thanks. Any more discussion by the COEP on this particular recommendation?
Is that information open to the public?
Yeah.
Is there a way to
Excuse me?
access that?
No.
See, Autumn?
I like the spirit of this recommendation, and would also, I don't know if it's not in the employee information system, would like to also add some sort of aspect related to community engagement and positive community engagement of folks being a part of work plans or something like that, monitoring their development as employees.
So are you proposing that as additional language? Or
Yeah, as a friendly amendment. I mean, I think it's in line with our charge as a commission. So the amended language would be, I guess it would be in the last paragraph. Including but not limited to community, positive community engagement, or
I think it's already in there in the second last line of that
Sure.
paragraph.
That sounds great.
Okay.
Oh, there it is. It's already there.
Okay.
I mean, or I don't know if there's even more language that then we could use that relates directly to the engagement plan that we're developing. I mean, that might also be something to consider as well.
Are you proposing that as more language, or you just want
I don't
that thought
need-
out there?
I don't-
Okay.
It's just there.
Can I get a motion on this recommendation?
I move we accept 1112158.
All right. I will call the roll. Ms. Edmo?
Yes.
Mr. Pulis?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Dr. Curley?
Yes.
Ms. Lanford?
Yes.
Ms. Medina?
Yes.
Dr. Silver?
Yes.
Mr. Steenson?
Yes.
Mr. Wolf?
Yes.
Motion passes. Before we take our break, I don't have anybody signed up here for public comment not related to any of the proposals. So I think maybe, well, let's see.
Yeah.
That's okay. What do I got here?
Yeah.
Okay, I see you here, Dan. And you're the only yes I see.
Hi, Dan Handelman one more time with Portland Cop Watch. I mentioned that there are some comments we had on the TASER directive that I didn't forward to you. Or I actually did email and hand them to all of you, but I didn't bring them up at the time you were voting on it. I'm not sure what the process is, when the Bureau is going to come back with the revised directives, and whether you get to look at them one more time before they get finalized, or if they're just going to work on it, whatever the DOJ says, and then that'll be it. I would hope that it would come back to you so you can see whether it included the things that you asked for, and I'm hoping that at that time, maybe we can put in those couple of amendments. I think also, if you have time, maybe you should vote to let the Bureau know you're going to give them more information about the foot pursuits. So now that you've pulled that line out about solo pursuits, they might not think it's an important issue to you, and the people who are going to be reviewing your comments, so maybe you might want to just let them know as a placeholder that you're looking at that issue, and we'll come up with a recommendation later. And I went to the Training Advisory Council meeting last night, and I raised this issue and didn't get a response, that there's 2 private foundations using the training facility for $1,000 a head training. And they're calling it Meet the Heat. And it's saying they're going to teach people emergency vehicle maneuvers, firearms and tasers, realistic scenarios, defensive tactics, and meet members of the CERT team and the K-9 unit, exclamation point. But there's no mention of de-escalation or community engagement or outreach or any of the things that you're trying so hard to get the police to focus on. So they're trying to get people who have $1,000 to spare to come down just to look at the quote-unquote exciting, violent things that police do. And I find that very disturbing, given the nature of what we're trying to do here in this room and with this DOJ agreement together. And I'm hoping you'll do something. So this is supposed to happen on April 1st. It's the Citizens Crime Commission, which is an arm of the Portland Business Alliance. And they're raising money for the Portland Police Foundation, which does good things for kids. That's great, but I don't think we should do it at the expense of, making violence something that is something that the community should be excited about. So I'm hoping that you will comment on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. That is the only yes I have on this list, Keith. And I don't think no, I don't even see your name, but I'll give you 2 minutes. Okay, I'll give you 2 minutes.
So tomorrow I have a court hearing, and this is to schedule 2 criminal trials, one involving interference with a police officer. The other one is involving a criminal trespassing charge, which I got at City Hall, which is kind of ironic in itself, since it's supposed to be a public place, and they shouldn't be barring people with cameras that are filming mentally ill people get beat up by the police at City Hall. And at this point, the police commissioner / mayor of ours has refused to give my lawyers the surveillance footage that shows his G4S security goon falsified police charges on me and tackled me. So they're actually altering video and not releasing it to lawyers that are issuing subpoenas as they take people forward in criminal trials over simply filming. And I do have PTSD, so not only are they warring on journalists, they're warring on people that actually have mental illnesses too. And so now I'm faced with the stress of possibly doing a little jail time and all these criminal hearings and stuff, simply because I run around and film the police, and they don't like the fact that I film them as they're violating citizens' rights, homeless people's rights, picking on the mentally ill, beating up journalists, and all the various stuff they do for this community. So I just wanted to bring up the fact that,
Time's up,
there's
Peter.
a big war on mentally ill people still, and also journalists in this town.
Time's up. Thank you. Okay, let's take a break for about 10 minutes.
Can I comment before the break?
Excuse me?
Could I make a comment before the break?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Two things that I wanted to say. I want to respond to the community members here about videotaping officers. And I understand your experience and your feelings. I'm with you. And there is no law that forbids a person from filming an officer while on the job. So any person has a right to do that. And if they can't arrest you for doing just that. That's one part of it. And I also wanted to respond to Tom about the EIS. I went to the training, the police presentation on EIS. I watched that, and I personally felt like EIS was not the best tool. It really needs some improvement. It's not one of the best tools. So that's just something that I wanted to put out there.
All right, we take a break. Back in 10 minutes. Thank you.
consider looking at that letter that Robert West has?
No, I will not.
A member of COAB, Jakari.
Tasha. Okay. Tom, to let you know, number 10 is not in the packets, but we're going to flash it up on the screen when it comes time to discuss it. To let you know that Ime, who was recently in a car accident, has had to leave. She's not feeling well, but we still have a quorum because Bud's on the phone. Okay? And we have a voting member who is not in the room. And here they come. Tiska, tiska, tiska. Recommendation number 111-215-9. Minimize incidents of bystander endangerment. The PPB should revise its policy in current Directive 1010 use of force as may be necessary to ensure that the incidence of bystander endangerments when firearms are discharged or potentially discharged is minimized. To determine whether bystander endangerments are already being minimized, a review of PPB's relevant training and relevant incidents should be undertaken by the Portland Police Bureau's inspector and the COCO and reported on to the DOJ and the city. That is the recommendation. Any public comment? Dan, I think you're the only one that's consistently. What I do. Dan, are you choosing to forego this opportunity?
Yeah, I'm Dan Handelman with Portland Cop Watch. I appreciate this addition to your recommendations around 1010. I think backstop is the general term for how the police see what's behind them. And not only could there be endangerment to other citizens directly by bullets that go flying or AR-15 bullets that keep traveling because they can go 100 or 300 yards, I can't remember which one it is. But there's also the potential of them hitting something that could explode, such as propane tanks and gasoline pumps. And there have been at least 2 shootings in the last couple of years where officers fired their weapons in gas stations. So I'm hoping that this contemplates backstop generally and not just the endangerment to civilians directly. One could read it, I guess, both ways. So thanks.
Discussion by the COAB. Or Tom, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the subcommittee recognizes that the current Directive 1010 has a strong piece of language about the issue. But since there are incidents where it appears to be happening, it seemed to the subcommittee that the inspector and or the COCO who can access the data, because the COAB can't, should look into whether or not that's an issue from a data-driven analysis. So that's the purpose of the recommendation.
Discussion by the COAB. No discussion?
I mean,
Philip?
I'm confident that we're pretty much in agreement with this, and if I'm correct, then I would like to make a motion that we support this recommendation.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Any more discussion? Opportunities here. All right. So I'm going to call the roll. Ms. Edmo?
yes.
Mr. Pulis?
Yes, yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. Lanford?
Yes.
Ms. Medina?
Yes.
Dr. Silver?
Yes.
Mr. Steenson?
Yes?
Mr. Wolf?
Yes.
Motion passes. That was number 9. The next one is number 10, and my understanding is that this somehow got was not included in the packet. So it's up on the screen for you to have a look at while I read it. Make explicit and unequivocal in any appropriate directives and training procedures and practices that heighten risk. Not any particular distance between subject and officer determines whether it is appropriate to draw a weapon. The PPB should enact a policy emphasizing that the so-called 21-foot rule does not exist and/or that it does not per se justify shooting when the suspect is less than 21 feet away, and is never applicable if the officer already has his gun drawn and pointed. To determine whether this has been occurring in the absence of a policy, A review of PPB's relevant training and relevant incidents should be undertaken by the PPB's inspector and the COCO and reported on to the DOJ and the city.
Can I address this?
Yes.
Historically, I can't remember the name of the quote-unquote expert. He was somebody 10, 15, 20 years ago, came up with this idea that absolutely, if someone was armed with a knife, usually the knife was the weapon that was being used in the examples that were being taught, that because of the proximity, you could shoot the person. And that's what departments started teaching, and this department, this bureau, taught that for some period of time. And it has been rejected by the bureau as a matter of training, at least that's my understanding. It has been condemned by Park and other groups that more recently, just in the last month or two, as one of 30 guiding use of force principles, was condemned by, and Rochelle can help me with the actual name? PERF. Police Executive Research Forum, something like that. It's this national think tank of police executives, police chiefs, whatever. And one of the 30 guiding principles they came out with was to make sure that this 21-foot rule is not in place. And the concern is that although there may be different training, that in a de facto sense, the result is the same, that if someone has a knife and they're within 21 feet, they're getting shot and killed. And so we don't know that to be the case, as the subcommittee doesn't know that, but there's some anecdotal evidence that may still be happening, and I'm not sure whether that's good or bad, but so we're just asking that the inspector and the COGL look into this, because it is not uncommon for someone to have a knife of whatever size and be perceived by the police to be a threat, and sometimes enough to shoot and kill them. So we're just asking that it be looked into.
Public comment? Looking at you, Dan, right here, it says maybe. You want to take advantage of the maybe?
I'm looking for something. I think the main issue here is going back to another recommendation you passed that says the policy and training should match each other. So if this isn't being taught in training, it should say something in the policy that this is not the way it is. What I was trying to look for is the OIR group had another round of recommendations in January, and I thought that they brought this up again in there, but I'm not 100% sure, so I'm not going to state it on the record until I find it. So thanks.
Okay, discussion by the COAB. Paul?
Just to be very clear, back in, I don't remember when the 21-foot rule was being taught. It was in 1983, Toolers, who was the one that came up with it, and it has been misrepresented and misunderstood greatly. It was actually not established as a rule. It was established as a tactical concept, and that's what we talk about it as only. One of the first things that we talk about is that somebody can be 21 feet away from you with an arm, with a weapon, a knife, and not be a threat at all. And that we go into detail of all of the things that need to be taken into consideration when assessing whether or not the person poses a threat. And things from your ability, their ability, clothing, what they're wearing, what they're not wearing, your familiarity with your own equipment, what the terrain is, wet ground, gravel, curbs, what's between you and them, and so on, sobriety even to that extent. Again, age, ability of the person and you, multiple threats, do you have multiple people there, injuries that you have or they have, what can you do to create distance? So this is not anything that's been taught, and it is spelled out very clearly that the 21 foot, how that came in was studies done and what is the reaction time that it takes somebody to get that kind of distance. But again, somebody can be 21 feet away from you with a knife and not be a threat at all. Depends on what's between you and them, or I'm inside the building, they're not. I mean, so all of those things are discussed. So this is something that is not taught, has not been taught. I don't remember if it ever was taught, the 21 foot rule, but it's a reactionary gap is what we talk about, and it's assessing the threat and what it is, and so many different factors that need to be taken into consideration to determine if it is or isn't.
I don't know, you gave it to yeah, okay.
All right, so it took me a minute, but yes, it was in the most recent OIR group report that came out in January. They were reporting on a case that happened in 2011 where one of the officers who shot a man who was approaching them with a knife said that he shot him because the man was closer than 21 feet away with an edged weapon. So I don't know if it's being taught or what, but that was in his mind. And the OIR repeated that the 21-foot rule is not a green light for deadly force, and they quoted police chiefs who are the ones who gave the information to the Police Executive Research Forum. So this is police chief said, don't teach this, and for whatever reason, a Portland police officer did rely on the 21-foot rule to shoot and kill a homeless veteran who was approaching him with a knife. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. All right, did you have a question?
What year was that?
2011. You say 2011? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Paul?
Again, as I talked about, that 21 foot just gives you an idea of what the amount of time it could take somebody to get from you to them and what the reactionary time is. So again, approaching it, that tells me something. They're coming at the officer. They're not just standing there. It's not some static thing. So I think just with the half a sentence that we've gotten from this, that we can't start to make conclusions based on things that we don't know.
John?
Well, the only comment I would have is that, again, it's the city's own consultants that are reporting on an incident they investigated. So if they ascribe this statement to the officer that he relied upon the 21-foot rule, I think it has significance. It may be another area where, through no fault of anyone, maybe it's a lack of policy or training, but that officers aren't getting the message that the 21-foot rule isn't in place. And so we're asking for a policy to say, it's not there, don't use it, and we want it investigated. So.
Todd?
Just real quick, I mean, I know Paul is being in training and having been in training is probably way more articulate about talking about this, but I did spend some time in training myself. And I'm not sure, this isn't an objection to what's being recommended here, just a statement to make sure that that the community who's in the room understand that at least during my time in the police bureau, there has never been a 21-foot rule that gives me or any other police officer carte blanche with no other circumstances present just to shoot someone within 21 feet that has a weapon. Like Paul said, when it comes to deadly force, it's called totality of the circumstances. There are many other things there. But it is important for officers to understand what a reactionary distance is and how far away or how much ground someone can cover who decides to rush you. And there are so many different things that play into that. There are people who you would look at who you can say do not have the capacity to cover 21 feet very fast. And there are other people who you would say can cover it very quickly. So I think that it's important to understand that that is not a concept that the Police Bureau has taught as a rule, but it is something that's important for officers to evaluate amongst everything else that they have to evaluate.
Okay. Siadam, did you have something?
Yeah. I mean, I think part of what this recommendation, at least for me, comes down to is something that may have been widely used in the past by police bureaus in general, that we would like to make a statement against using. And I think to build community support, something like that is important to do. For those reasons, I would support that, and I just wanted to share that.
More discussion? Vote?
I share Siadam's comment, and I have her same her sentiment, and I would like to motion to approve this.
A second? Okay, I will call the roll. Ms. Edmo?
Yes.
Mr. Pulis? Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. Lanford?
Yes.
Ms. Medina?
Yes.
Dr. Silver? Dr. Silver? Mr. Steenson?
Yes.
Mr. Wolf?
Yes.
Motion? Okay, motion passes. The next one is 031016-1, I do believe. Which I cannot find. Yeah. Directive 870.20. Custody and transportation of subjects should be revised as follows. 1. The directive should contain only policy statements, since such policy statements apply to all members of the Portland Police Bureau. Extraneous and confusing section titles such as procedure and member responsibilities should be eliminated. 2. The Portland Police Bureau prohibited the use of maximum restraint in its tips and techniques. Number 2015-2, dated April 2nd, 2015. A violent subject's legs may be secured together at the knees or ankles, such as in the straight leg restraint, but the subject's legs will not be pulled behind the body and fastened to the handcuffs, belt, etc. Current Directive 870.2 states that maximum restraints are authorized. The directive should be amended to eliminate any reference to the use of maximum restraints and to specifically state that the use of maximum restraints is prohibited. 3. The words might present should be replaced by is presenting. This change would result in a current statement in the directive reading as follows. A reasonable suspicion based on articulable facts that the person is presenting an immediate threat of serious injury to the member or others present, if not restrained, per Oregon and federal law. And the last entry is the PPB should eliminate the use of terms such as deranged, bizarre, and excited delirium from its directives and training. Tom, you want to speak to that?
Two comments. Item number 2 is not an issue. Number 3, the sentence that we're recommending be changed has to do with one of the circumstances under which someone can be handcuffed. And the subcommittee felt that the language might present was not imminent or immediate enough, and it should be as present or as presenting. So we're recommending that change to that sentence that appears a couple of different times with relation to a basis for handcuffing someone. And there's all kinds of other reasons that they can handcuff someone, but that one in particular we wanted changed. And Rochelle, could you explain the last item, the last paragraph? It's not actually part of this directive, but it's an issue that's come up, and the subcommittee took a position on it.
Okay. In 2 or 3 of the directives that the Data Systems Use of Force Subcommittee is looking at, and also the Mental Health Committee is looking at, and maybe the Accountability Committee will also be looking at, are words that are offensive, such as deranged and bizarre. There are other words in various of these policies that I think people have issues with. And we're asking that all such words that aren't medical words and are also offensive to people be removed from these directives. The issue of excited delirium is a little more complicated. Excited delirium is a controversial term that's used both by police and by coroners and medical people in ERs, but is not an official diagnosis in the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Psychiatric Disorders or in the manual that physicians use for the purposes of diagnosis. It is a term that is used when a person is in a use of force situation with the police and something goes wrong and they die. And instead of the police, in this case, being looked at as people who might be accountable for the death of that individual, the person has been just automatically said to be experience excited delirium, and that was the cause of death, even though that's not a diagnosis. And so we're asking that this term be removed from all police directives. In addition to it being not a formal diagnosis and also a very controversial term, it is used almost exclusively with males and almost exclusively with African American males. And it's hard to justify that only men and only black men could die from this situation when they're in a force encounter with the police. So for those reasons, I can go on, but I'll stop there.
Tom?
I would just add one other thing. It also kind of came to the forefront when in these encounters, tasers are often used, and Taser International, who sells tasers, was promoting the concept of excited delirium being the real cause. It wasn't some use of force, it was this notion of excited delirium. And it becomes, I think, kind of a catchword that the police in tragic situations where people die want to point at this sort of phantom thing called excited delirium as the cause of death. And I think it prevents a serious investigation into what really caused the death. It may not have been the police, but as opposed to this notion of excited delirium.
Public comment.
Dan Handelman again with Portland Cop Watch, and I'm not doing this for my own benefit. I'm doing this because I want to encourage other people to read these things and have feedback too. So I'm hoping people at home will call in if they have something to say. But yeah, I'm glad Mr. Steenson brought up Taser International. It seems that basically the definition of excited delirium is somebody who dies in police custody, and Taser helps foment that definition. So that should be removed. I'm also glad that your recommendation is to put in a specific clause prohibiting maximum restraints, because the Bureau, when they posted the revised directive, they actually did pull out all the language about maximum restraints, but they didn't add a sentence saying maximum restraints are now prohibited. So it's very good that you have that as a specific part of this. Thank you.
I'd like to say something too. Actually, I see a lot of people that go to jail that don't even really need to be in handcuffs, and you guys, the Portland police, basically put everyone in handcuffs that goes to jail that I've ever seen. So I would like to see that changed, especially when it's a misdemeanor crime. The person poses no risk. You've already ran their name. They're, because a lot of injuries result from handcuffs. I'm someone who has permanent nerve damage from handcuffed injuries from being tortured by the Orange County police in Orange County, California. And every time I'm put in handcuffs, which happens frequently just for me filming, my handcuffed injuries are exasperated. And every time I tell these police that I have nerve damage in my hand, it doesn't even seem to matter. They put the cuffs on as tight as they want. It doesn't matter that I have PTSD. It doesn't matter. None of this stuff matters. They just seem to always want to put people in handcuffs, whether it's for the most minor crime in the world. I can see putting people in handcuffs for a lot of reasons, but you guys really need to possibly work on some policy changes where people don't automatically need to be put in handcuffs. It would actually make the arrest experience a lot less traumatizing, and there's a lot of people with mental illnesses that you guys are arresting on petty crimes, and basically, then they have to deal with being in handcuffs, restrained, all this additional stress. And someone like me, who has injuries from handcuffs and sadistic cops that like to squeeze handcuffs and leave them on as tight as possible, someone like me has to deal with my injuries flaring up for a month
Time's
or
up,
two
Keith.
every time I get
Time's
arrested
up.
for filming. So,
Thank you. Right.
Yeah, my name's Bob. I'm from Film the Police 911. I have an objection to subjects. It's dehumanizing. In its place, there's two that could be used, either a prisoner or a patient. If they're transporting a person that's depressed, that wants to kill themselves, to be called a subject, that just doesn't sound right. They should be called a patient or something like that. And I just want to bring up that subjects are when you use that in police terms, it's dehumanizing.
Thanks, Bob. Paul, and then Tom. Paul.
I heard a couple of reasons why people feel that the use of excited delirium is being used, that's to blame on a cause of death. Obviously, the cause of death is determined by a medical examiner. What I can tell you, and again, if we want to use different terms, we would absolutely be open to suggestions, but it kind of goes, I think this is one of those terms that there's some controversy around, as well as suicide by police. What those terms do for the police, and again, if we want to find something different, absolutely. But what they do is they, in 2 words or in just a short phrase, really spell out kind of what's going on and what that means. I was looking just at Seattle. They have a whole section on just excited delirium. But what it does do is it starts to talk about what resources are needed, what medically the issues could possibly be, and that medical treatment needs to be the primary focus here. As well as with suicide police, it brings a lot of other things. That the potential is that this person wants the police to shoot them, which again, what does that mean? What resources do we need to bring to the scene to help that happen? But again, if we want to come up with different terms, the police bureau is definitely, I would think, open to learning what those would be or different terms, but it's very quick, it's very short, and it says a lot. And that is helpful for us. So having something like that is what we need. So yeah, open to suggestions.
Okay. Tom is the next speaker, and then I have a question from Bud, and then we had Philip's hand and Rochelle's hand. So Tom and Tasha, okay.
Just briefly, on the handcuffing question, the subcommittee looked at, there must be a dozen reasons that the police bureau thinks it has to justify handcuffing. And I don't think we really felt we were qualified to weigh in on whether all of those were appropriate reasons or that issue could be addressed, but it's not something the subcommittee isn't aware of.
Okay, question from Bud, asking Rochelle, if confronted with a subject acting as if they were on PCP, where they're extremely violent, delusional, superhumanly strong, and not affected by taser or other less lethal techniques, what should an officer call that?
Well, there was a great deal of discussion at the Mental Health Committee. I think, Tasha, you were there. And my position was, and some people agreed with me, that the officer should describe what he or she sees. So if the person is breathing hard or exhibiting whatever they're exhibiting that is objective and can be seen, they should say, this is what I see. If you take shortcuts, like using a diagnostic term or a controversial term like excited delirium, the assumption is that the person that you're talking about meets all the criteria of that diagnosis or of the syndrome of excited delirium. So if a person is showing one symptom or two symptoms, then it needs to be spelled out. If they're showing 5 symptoms, it needs to be spelled out. Nobody will know what is being seen unless you say what is being seen. The shortcut way is just not workable.
Philip and then Tasha.
Okay, so I've been taking in a lot of things, and what I've noticed are 2 things that I would like to emphasize. The use of the word deranged or excited delirium and strange, bizarre, those are not appropriate terms to be using. The police do not have they're not medical professionals, they are not doctors. And the word delirium, an excited delirium, it can mean a whole range of things. It could mean many different things, but that word alone doesn't it just leaves room for judgment. And it's taking a quick judgment, a perspective on that person. And it's calling them crazy, and it's blaming them for their own death. And that has a huge impact on the community, especially people experiencing mental health issues. So I really want to emphasize that point. Secondly, suicide by cop. Again, I have to say, when you use that word, suicide, or that phrase, suicide by cop, it means like the person is asking to be shot. But that's not true in general. When the police confront a person who is experiencing mental crisis, that's not always true that they're wanting that. So that gives the officer room to not be accountable, because the police is killing that person. Well, it's putting blame on that victim, and it's victim blaming because they're quote unquote crazy. So using it just because it's brief, that's very dismissive and doesn't recognize what's happening, the mental health experience. And that's why we're here. That's because police are killing people with mental health problems, and that's been a history. So those two, the use of those terms aren't acceptable.
Tasha?
So just two things real quick. On the topic of language, I'm not going to weigh in on anything specific that we've talked about. I would just say that this committee has a huge challenge because it represents about 500,000 people who all have a different concept of what is and is not appropriate for language. And so I think that I would find it beneficial, and I brought this up at the Mental Health Subcommittee, if you're going to say you don't want something, a suggestion of what to take, of what you would want in its place would be very helpful. To just say that's not acceptable kind of then puts us in a position where we choose another word that might not be acceptable or another word that might not be acceptable. So having some suggestion of what should go in its place would be helpful. So that's the first thing on language. And then just to recognize the challenge that exists for you too is to pick the appropriate word that someone else in this community will not find offensive. The other piece is just a quick education piece for the community that's in the room, and maybe even some members on the COAB, on changing policy and understanding that policy change doesn't happen, is not an instant change. So I'm referring to number 2, which nobody's talked about, and I realize everybody knows that that's changed. But understand we have changes that aren't going to appear in policy but will appear in practice. And once the chief of police has said you will or will not do something anymore, regardless of whether it's changed in policy, that's the rule. So, and I think it's just important for people to understand that, especially now, where our policies are not, it's not just the police bureau going in and changing a policy. The policy practice now has to go through the DOJ, the COAB, the community, all before that policy can actually be altered. So I just wanted people to be aware of that the practice that's in the policy can be changed prior to the words in the policy being changed.
Phil, did you have your hand up again?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to Tasha. So you were saying, making a suggestion. I do have an idea. That person seems disconnected, experiencing anxiety. They have a heightened heartbeat. Describing what you see from that person. But how do you describe a person who is suicidal? It could mean so many things, just an array of things. And that puts an automatic judgment on them. But being specific, their shortness of breath, their shaking, does that help to explain that?
Certainly, I think I'm talking more about the policy piece, about when you're talking about language in the policy. I think when you talk about descriptors for people or the things you're seeing, sometimes, and I think when it comes to policy, you have to understand we have to write a policy that every officer, when they see those words, are going to describe the same thing, and not everything is as simple as describing everything. So when we're trying to tell officers, when you see this, we want you to do something, and I think that's where, for excited delirium, that's where it came into play for the police, is we wanted to say, this is what excited delirium looks like, and you are required to take these steps, which include having medical come out, those different things. So, I understand it, and I don't really have a strong opinion one way or another. I think it's important that whatever comes out, every single police officer, this is the policy they must follow. So this is a rule for them. So they better understand it. And I don't think you could, in policy, describe every little circumstances, and I think that becomes the challenge.
Michelle and Maria.
Well, I agree with you.
Did you say I said Michelle.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Rochelle.
Very close. And just kind of add a little bit to what Tasha said too. So officers, when they're seeing all this, they are describing that stuff in their reports. And to kind of add a little bit to what Paul said, and please correct me if I'm misquoting you or misstating you. When you're looking at excited delirium, and it's kind of one of those things where there are certain things that officers absolutely have to do when they're seeing all this, and one is called medical personnel to come in and check. And when medical comes in, officers are told, you need to describe what you are seeing. So they have to explain exactly what they are seeing to medical so that they can get proper treatment. So it's just a little bit to add about what Tasha was saying. It encompasses a lot, but officers are expected to to explain what they are seeing, what has been done, what they've observed of this subject, not only for report purposes, but for medical treatment purposes.
Maria?
So I feel like maybe, I don't want to call it denial, but there's something going on when there's this condition called excited delirium that an increased number of Black men are dying from in police custody. So that is a big indicator for me saying that something is wrong. If there's a large number of Black men who just so happen to have excited delirium. So I'm not really sure how to fix that, but I think I need to know a little bit more about like what exactly is excited delirium. Is it like you get so stressed out that you have a heart attack? Like what?
Dr. Silver?
Well, okay. I can't tell you what excited delirium is because I think it doesn't exist.
Mhm.
It's a term that is used by the police and by coroners, and it's pushed by Taser International to avoid them getting sued for people who are shot and die from tasers. It's not something that's real. So a person who dies may have a bunch of situations. They might be on meth or cocaine. They might have heart problems. They might have this, that, and the other thing. But that doesn't mean they have this phony, excited delirium.
See, Adam?
And it's just an accountability issue. If you call it that, you're excused from that person dying.
See, Adam?
I think this is an important conversation, and I want to echo what Michelle and Tasha said about offering alternative language and new language, and would propose that we perhaps expand this list of things and really call out some of the things that Maria is also, the connection between the racially coded aspect of this and just work to kind of, I guess, massage that out and maybe separate it from points 1, 2, and 3 and pull it into 2 different recommendations instead of 1 full recommendation would be my preference. So I guess what I'm doing is a friendly amendment to remove the last item in there and maybe kick it back to the committee for more consideration on to add acceptable or to add more responsive person-first language, and then consider the first 3 pieces of the recommendation.
Rochelle, then Philip?
If you take the last part out, then the words deranged and bizarre and excited delirium exist in the policy. And so it would appear as if we're saying, well, this recommendation is fine with only items 1, 2, and 3, and we'll put it forward that way, which is not what we think, not what the subcommittee is thinking. I can tell you that the Mental Health Committee is considering more words that are objectionable, like, for example, the word welfare. I don't remember the exact sentence, but it's like, you can't transport a person or call a cab for a person on welfare, and they want to change that to public assistance. There are some other words that both are objectionable or are slang, like the word detox. is used here. And if you're going to take a person someplace, you should use the real name, not just the quickie name for it.
Okay, Philip, then Tom. What, Philip, then Jimmy? How, were you pointing? Were you
Two
raising your hand,
things.
Tom? Okay, Philip, then Tom.
Tasha, I hear what you're saying, but one point that I want to discuss is using the word delirium and then expanding upon that. I don't understand why you can't expand and just get that word out of there. Why does that word have to be in the policy at all? It's such a judgment word. Why can't we add some language in there to explain what that looks like? And then the use of force subcommittee has already strongly felt in the past and currently feels that and that's the reason why we voted to pass it in the subcommittee to bring here for all of us to discuss and bringing it back to the subcommittee. We've already decided and it's already been agreed upon. So sending it back there, I don't agree with that, and that's my comment.
Tom, then Jimmy.
Yeah, I don't disagree with Tasha when she suggests that there may be words that ought to be suggested, but as we've said many times in bringing recommendations forward, we are not policy writers. We're not writing policy. We're making recommendations that have to go through the COCO, through the DOJ, through the city. I mean, it's a long road, and there are things that we feel ought to be incorporated, but word for word, what substitute words could be, I don't know. I don't consider that to be our job as a subcommittee, and with all due respect, I would not consider it a friendly amendment to pull that portion out, because we have spent a considerable amount of time talking about the issue.
Jimmy, then Tasha.
Yeah, I agree with Tom and Philip and Dr. Silver. Definitely, when it comes to talk about excited delirium, no, that word needs to be pulled. I mean, it's a shortcut. It's a way when something happens and a person is killed, if you will, dead, victimized, if you will. A shortcut to the victimization of that person, to explain that victimization would be to say, well, it was excited delirium. This person was excited, and that would make it look like this person has extra strength, this person's on some kind of drugs, or this person's delirious and without any kind of diagnosis. But now the person's dead. Now, in the further that, it comes out in the newspaper. If something like this happens, it comes out in the newspaper. This person was shot or arrested or whatever the case may be, and he was excited delirium is what we saw when the person was tased, for example. United Taser. They like to say instead of being a person being held accountable for another person's death, we'd just say it was excited delirium. It wasn't that the taser was the cause of death, or the person got shot, if you will, because he was excited and something happened. Anyway, it's something that we don't need to have in here. It needs to go. It really does. Some other words, Natasha, you mentioned something about other words, different words we can use, different language. You know, I agree with that wholeheartedly. But that we have to work on that. But this excited delirium, I think, is kind of a good catchphrase for the press and whoever else want to do some printed or some radio copy to say this is what happened when there was some kind of fatality involved, and particularly as it relates to police officers.
Tasha.
So, Philip, I just want you to know I'm not defending the words. I'm really saying that if that's the recommendation, it is really more about what words would you recommend, and not just for excited delirium, but for all of them. And Tom, I actually do think it's the COAB's responsibility to make recommendations. It's not about a policy. It's about saying the word bizarre is not an acceptable word. We, the COAB, believe this is a more appropriate word because you are the community that's representing. So when somebody else in the community looks at whatever word we finally do select that you selected, we have, that's who you represent. So I do think that is part of the COAB's responsibility
Right.
to give recommendations on words.
Right, yeah,
Dr.
and
Dr.
what I
Silver,
remember is focusing on
hold on, please.
I'd like to respond to Tasha if I could.
I have another hand. Okay, Dr. Silver?
I think that the words are clear
It's me
that
next then, Kate.
should be used, and they're behavioral descriptions. So whatever you see are the words. And in each encounter, they will be different.
Philip?
So instead of categorizing it and classifying it as bizarre, which is a judgment statement, you can say the person is walking backwards. He's wearing his socks on his head and his hat on his feet, rather than saying he's bizarre.
So what word do you use in the policy?
Behavioral descriptors.
Philip?
Okay, Tasha, I hear what you're saying. And again, the recommendation is focusing on the deletion of that word. That's what we're focusing on. And if you would like another recommendation for other words, then that could be another recommendation. But tonight, we're just focusing on getting that word out of there. And it seems that our goal is being a little bit, that is the goal, and that's what we're trying to focus on. And that's the entirety of it. And I'm not objecting to your request for a better word or a different word, but again, I think our goal is to get that out of the policy. And it's not our job, and it's a little bit not on the topic that have at hand. So I think, we can hold that discussion for a better time.
Any other comments from the COAB? Do I have a motion regarding this recommendation? Philip moves. Do I have a
I
second?
move to close discussion and support this recommendation.
Rochelle?
Second.
I'm going to call the question. Call the roll. Ms. Edmo?
Yes.
Mr. Pulis?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. Lanford?
Yes.
Ms. Medina? Dr. Silver?
Yes.
Mr. Steenson?
Yes.
Mr. Wolf?
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you very much. I think we've set a record. Yes, Tom?
I just want to make a comment. I just want to thank members of the subcommittee and members of the full COAB, and as well as the community. It is taken a lot of work to develop these recommendations, and I know it takes a lot of time at the COAB meetings to air them and vote on them. And it's work that the DOJ has asked the subcommittee to do. It's part of the universal review process that the city has in place and wants us to weigh in on. And it'd be nice if it took less time, but it doesn't. And I appreciate people's, and I know the subcommittee does, work and attention to this, as well as the community, of course.
Thank you, Tom. See Autumn.
And I'd like to maybe respectfully ask the Mental Health Subcommittee to take up maybe suggestions on language around policy. I think they would be the most appropriate subcommittee to do that.
Maria?
Or maybe like, so with that last line, I feel like all of the subcommittees could talk about it at their meeting and bring it back, or like maybe have an email or something going.
No email.
Oh, okay, well, not an email.
Public meeting law, no way.
Okay, well, or post notes on the COAB website. I don't know. I'm just saying, the reason why I'm saying that is because it sounds like everyone has so much work. So if everyone in their subcommittees just took a minute to like try to come up with some ideas around those words and then brought them back it just seems like there could possibly be more.
There probably are lots more words. I think it would take a dedicated look at the whole policy, or not several policies, in order to be able to make sure you've identified the words that are objectionable. Now, I don't know who's going to take that on, but I think it would.
Not Maria.
Mhm. Tosh.
I might recommend that it's taken on as the policy's taken on. I mean, as you find the word in the policy that you bring here as a recommendation to remove, that you come with a recommendation that says, we think this is what should go in. I just, that would be my request, that happen, because at some point, somebody's gonna have to pick a word to go in there, so.
Okay. All right, we finished the recommendations that we have on our agenda for tonight. We have a few more minutes. If there's something that is burning or pressing that anybody'd like to say, or... Yes, Amy? Oh. You got a memo from me, an email from me regarding the 2 meetings that occurred with the Assistant Attorney General, Ms. Gupta, and with the Attorney General, one on Wednesday, one on Thursday. Did you have any questions? Or did you want to hear from anybody on the board who was able to attend those meetings? I think Tosh and I were the only ones at the Thursday meeting. But a number of COAB members went to the meeting with the Assistant Attorney General. Want to give a perspective or talk about it?
I'd like to hear about it.
I wasn't the only, I think there was other people there. I think what I could say about it was that it was nice to be in a room with people from AMA and the COAB and just everyone in a room together to give their perspective about how things are working, like what's going really well, and also talk about some challenges that we're having. It was very exciting. I don't really know what else to say about it. I don't know.
Bill?
I want to say that the meeting was a private invite only. It was a private meeting, and I am going to throw this out there, but I really had a great time. I got the chance to see what DOJ's perspective was and how they are making changes to help what we're doing here, and how DOJ has been helpful in supporting the COAB, and how they can support the COAB and the relationship between COAB and DOJ. I thought that was great. And one other thing that was emphasized with it was that we would like a stipend for people who have been working very hard on this COAB, and it seems that the DOJ does recognize that, and so it was a great meeting all in all.
Yeah, I second that. I agree with Phil and Maria. It was a good meeting. It was a great meeting. As a matter of fact, the Assistant Attorney General, she really complimented Portland on doing what we're doing, on taking on such a huge task, working together with the City of Portland, the Portland Police Department, and the community to get things on track. It's really a big compliment. As a matter of fact, she suggested and said that this could become a model for the nation, depending on how this works out. Hopefully next year when she comes back, that we will be in full bloom, and maybe it will be a model for the nation. But overall, it was a great meeting, and I felt pretty good and pleased to be there.
Mm-hmm. In her closing comments, she did also reference our community engagement and outreach plan, and encouraged all members of the COAB and of the public to think about metrics, to think about how we think about success and how it's measured. So I thought that was a really important message to us as a whole about how we think about how success is defined, whether it's success is a singular thing or success is something that's ongoing. Partnership and engagement. So I think those were the suggestions that she made for us moving forward. And also an aside on that, or related to that, Kathleen and I had the opportunity to go out and talk with a classroom of students who is studying math out at NEA Family Center, who have undertaken the, anyway, they're studying something that they want to study, which is actually police use of force in Portland. And they want to try and understand more about how their community feels about it, how that it's impacted by it, and they've developed a survey, partly modeled after our survey that we put out. But in their survey, and I would encourage you, if you talk to an NEA student, ask them about their survey. They include 2 questions that I thought were extremely insightful, and hopefully they'll get a chance to present to us as a full COAB. But one of them was, what are the first 4 words that you think of when you think of police? And what are the first 4 words that you think of when you think of community? And as we move forward in trying to understand how to pull those 2 things closer together, the words and things that people think of, I thought those were just really insightful questions from students. So they're gonna, some of the questions are exactly the same as the ones that we used in our survey. They read our survey report, which was really amazing, and have expanded a little bit on it. So that's all I wanted to share.
Thanks. Here's a note from Bud. Number 1 message she got, and he's referring to AG Gupta, was that we needed to close the loop with DOJ to find out what's happening with the recommendations. So that is being focused on right now. So that was Wednesday, and Thursday was an even larger invitation-only meeting, and Tasha presented. Would you like to say something about that meeting, your perceptions of that meeting?
I actually was highly encouraged by the meeting and all the people that spoke there. Yes, I had a speaking part, which was intimidating, but I think it went okay. I made the news. It was actually very encouraging to have the Attorney General recognize the behavioral health unit, and that, again, that we're a model for other communities to follow. So that was appreciated. Yeah.
The room was filled with people who, many of whom are actually doing the on-the-ground work. Roy Pittman, who's been in Northeast Portland for a zillion years and training young people to be wrestlers. I hadn't seen him in so long, I was really struck by it. People like Kay Turan and Joyce Harris. The 1145 group, a group of ministers who walk in the neighborhood talking to young people who are either troubled or on the verge of getting into trouble, to try to bring them to some place where they'll do better. So it was that kind of group, and it was uplifting in a lot of ways. Antoinette Edwards presented about the Community Peace Coalition, or collaborative, yes. And you could see that the people at the head table were taking notes. So I'm not sure what the notes said, because I couldn't get a hold of the notes. I did ask for them. I think it was an uplifting thing to have all of those people in the room who are focused on the same thing, and that's trying to improve the relationship between Portland police officers and Portland residents. And they have many, many ways of going about that. They had many, many ways of seeing the problem and many, many ways of responding. And I'm really sorry that everybody couldn't have been there.
Can I add one thing to that? I know you were there, so you saw, but there were several young people in the room who spoke. One of them was a gentleman that came to one of our co-op meetings, and I'm blanking on his name, so I really apologize for that. RJ, and he is he looked very sharp and was very articulate. And you know what, it was great to watch all those people, these young kids talk. And it kind of reminded me of the fact that we sit here, and when RJ came in and he looked around the room and said, "Where are the young people?" Really, as part of the outreach of this COAB, I do think at some point in time, it will be imperative for us to find a way for them to share their voice because they're not in the room, they're not on the committee, and they are an important aspect of the future of the police bureau and the citizens building a relationship that's going to be meaningful. So I would highly encourage us to look at that particular piece.
The young people at NAYA want to present to COAB.
Let's have them.
And Laquita has been assigned the responsibility of bringing all the young people to the COAB. No, but she has a contact. She's the one who got RJ here for us, and I think we can focus on that. That's not a problem. Okay. So it's 8:22. Can I get a motion for adjournment?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
may I speak?
Yes, you may.
We were talking about metrics, and we were talking about suicide by cop. And one of the metrics is that Mr. Johnson, who has been deemed a suicide by cop, who died in November, has been deleted from the list that's posted by the Portland Police Bureau. So that means that there is one less fatality because he's not listed as a fatality. So at this point, what the Portland Police Bureau is accepting is 2 rather than 3 fatalities for the year and 3 non-fatalities. I suppose if we don't care about a human life, then whether they live or whether they die may not matter. But I think that the life of Mr. Johnson matters. And to say that somehow the word suicide wipes him out as a person to be considered is really, really troubling to me. I have taken the trouble to read the grand jury transcript of that death. I can tell you that 3 of the people involved in that death and in that investigation have been involved in other deaths. That's what starts to become important. Are we having repeat performances of either bad techniques or bad communications? That's what we're here to find out. Why is it happening? We can't find out why something's happening if we don't know what is happening. So words have a lot of power. And that's what this group is really about, is words. I mean, that's what we've been doing here for several hours, is using words. And it has been mentioned that we don't really want to dehumanize one another, do we? Or do we? I think it is our decision. I think it's really important that many, many people are not filling up this room, even though this committee is charged with producing trust. How are you going to do it? I have no serious idea how you're going to produce trust. But fudging the statistics is not a way to produce trust.
Thank you. Thank you. Does this work yet?
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
I move to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Meeting's adjourned.